parties can be reliant on donors, either industry donors, individual donors, business investments, even staying in the good books of newspaper owners, if you've been watching the programmes on Murdoch. We know that the case for acting on climate change has been undermined for decades by misinformation.
We'll hear from expert speakers, including scientists familiar with the topic. They will also hear from people who will be affected by their decisions, including businesses, farmers, trade unions, ordinary people. They'll learn about policy options and what impacts they will have. To help them evaluate all of this information and different perspectives, they'll also get some training on critical thinking and hidden bias. I think the other important thing to note at this point is that people don't know about the UK Climate Assembly because it hasn't been given any prominence, any great value from the government, the media hasn't really covered it. Contrast that to what happened in Ireland when they used the Citizens' Assembly to help the government decide how to change the law on abortion and same-sex marriage.
This Assembly member said, "There seems to be a political disconnect all over the Western world. Citizens' assemblies are a new layer of democracy. We probably put a couple of 100 hours of total time into our assembly, and we are probably the best informed amateurs in the country on this topic of abortion at the moment." So after its conclusions, the Irish Citizens' Assembly was asked to look at climate change, and they spent several days considering this. The conclusions were far more ambitious than the government would have proposed. So in a country that's quite dependent on its rural economy, the Citizens' Assembly members recommended that 89% of them said that greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture should be taxed. 80% wanted higher taxes on carbon-intensive activities. So it illustrates that a Citizens' Assembly will make recommendations that the government might not dare to do. So it is potentially a real support to a government tackling difficult issues like the climate crisis. What's really important is to understand that Citizens' Assemblies are always run by independent, non-partisan organisations. There's an organisation called Involve that has been involved in the Citizens' Assemblies in this country, and you can read up on their work. But their role is to make sure that everything is conducted fairly and effectively from the citizens' point of view. Extinction Rebellion will not design or run a Citizens' Assembly on climate. That's not our job, and we're not asking for that. We're asking the government to set one up and to follow the recommendations of the Assembly. We want standards to be upheld, and we know that the independence of the Assembly is essential to its success. In Scotland, they're a little way ahead of us, and the Scottish XR are helping other groups.
Between rival parties, and the issues we face require us to be much more cohesive and thoughtful and not base it all on us against them. And so there's been these deliberative democracy events sort of surging in a smallish way throughout 5 continents, including even South America, Japan and China, surprisingly, but obviously a lot in Europe. And the countries and cities where they happen, they tend to keep happening because people like them and they work. So there's a recent study of about 295 such events, which were commissioned by government, and where the government made it clear how they were going to adopt the recommendations, which were very impressive. And two of the things you find with virtually all of them, or all of them as far as I'm aware, is that people love them and want more, and they actually come forward with recommendations or agreements which are more far-sighted and unselfish than even than governments, although they are selected to be representative of all walks of life and not just chosen from the civically aware sector of society.